Hello and good afternoon, Division 3. This is our August webinar, which will be updates from SAAC, Management Council, and the President's Advisory Group summer meetings. I'm Allie Spungen, and today I'm joined by Eric Hartung, who will be delivering this webinar with me today. So just a short agenda of what you'll be hearing about from Eric and I today. Student Athlete Advisory Committee, you'll hear our July meeting updates, working group updates. From Management Council and PAG, you'll hear about the 2022 SAAC convention format and governance legislative proposals, Management Council slate of nominees and a new voting process, baseball and softball resolution, and the strategic positioning platform. You'll also hear from Management Council and PAG about the gender equity review, the campus sexual violence policy, transgender student athlete participation, and the interim name, image, and likeness policy and resources that are available. And then we'll finish off today's webinar with some time for some question and answers. So without further ado, I'll kick off my portion of today's webinar. So our July SAAC meeting was full of less speakers, but a lot of great conversation among our Division 3 primary and associate members. We discussed the 2021-22 legislation that will be voted on and an early discussion of what was coming from the membership and governance processes. So we reviewed the legislation process and upcoming proposals and shared the group's initial thoughts surrounding these proposals. We had about an hour of time with President Emmer to give updates and talk through some questions that SAAC had for him. He provided association-wide updates covering topics such as name, image, and likeness, the transgender student athlete participation policy, as well as gender equity and a few other topics as well. From an association-wide committee, SAAC members provided all their committee updates with notable information from their last committee meetings. They are gearing up for SAAC convention to be in person, and that also provides some student athlete activity. So stay tuned. There'll be a Special Olympics event in person again, as well as some student athlete opportunities to mingle and get together. Currently with SAAC, a divisional or association-wide discussion on a new SAAC logo. So stay tuned for our new Division 1, 2, and 3 SAAC logo to come out here. Hopefully in the next month, we'll have our new logo out. And then finally, Special Olympics 10-year celebration is coming up. We're excited that our partnership has hit that 10-year mark, so stay tuned for some really special engagements for this 10-year celebration. So not only at convention, but throughout the year, we'll have some great spotlights on social media, some stories, so stay tuned for that 10-year celebration. And just a reminder, you'll see a focus on student athlete voice, and it's more clear and louder than ever through an overarching goal of just Division 3 SAAC, but our other divisional counterparts. So we've increased that student athlete voice by getting those individuals in front of the variety of committees that they work with, but also you as a membership. So you would remember a few months ago, we had our chair and vice chair here to talk about what is SAAC and that student athlete voice. So that webinar is still available if you'd like to check it out, and also invite your primary associate member to do the What is SAAC presentation. So stay tuned to keep hearing our SAAC voice loud and clear. Next up would just be our working group updates. Division 3 SAAC had an ambitious 2020-21 year, achieving all the goals set by all 3 working groups. And that was during a pandemic where often participation in the sport they love was few and far between, but they stepped up to the plate and reached all their goals this year. So we're very proud of the work they did in 2020, 2021. So during our July meeting, we discussed our new working groups, and as you can tell, mental and physical health, they had a great second annual mental health social media campaign. If you followed along on the D3 SAAC Twitter, our social justice and inclusion working group celebrated Black History Month Twitter campaign in February, and in June they finished their Pride Month Twitter campaign. So check those out, and feel free to encourage you to follow along this next year as well. And then Special Olympics, they put out a Planning a Division 3 Special Olympics virtual event resource that can be found on linked here, but also found on the D3 SAAC webpage. And then always just a friendly reminder to report your Special Olympics events. We love to track those hours and just know what great things and events you are doing to partner with Special Olympics. And so looking forward to 2021-22, SAAC voted to keep these same working groups because they've made such a stride in all of these areas, and they are still at the forefront of our Student Athlete Advisory Committee. So stay tuned to what they'll achieve this year from a SAAC perspective. Moving forward to the 2022 NCAA Convention. Convention will be January 19th through 22nd in Indianapolis. So come over to Indy and have a good time. We're excited to be together in person as much as possible. Registration opens Tuesday, September 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern. And just some key in-person programming to highlight is our honor celebration, which will be Wednesday, January 19th, association-wide educational sessions, Special Olympics activity, and delegates reception will be Thursday, January 20th. Our Division III Issues Forum, conference meetings, and LGBTQ awards celebration will be Friday, January 21st. And then we'll end the 2022 convention with our Division III business session Saturday, January 22nd. Moving on, we have a full agenda for legislation at this year's convention. Taking note, the governance structure is sponsoring 5 proposals for the 2022 NCAA convention that would do the following: make modifications to football practices. And what that entails is the Management Council agreed to sponsor a proposal that reduces football contact opportunities during the preseason and regular season, while allowing for more equipment use during the spring period to teach appropriate blocking and tackling. The Interpretations and Legislation Committee introduced the proposed legislation after receiving a recommendation from the Division III Football Concussion Task Force Working Group. At its February meeting, the 2021 Football Concussion Task Force received an update that showed data trends showing a disproportionate number of head impact exposures during the football preseason as compared to the regular season, and that most head impact exposures were occurring during practice and not games. A survey completed by 92% of Division III football coaches was sent in April to gather how Division III football teams currently conduct their practices in regard to contact before the legislation was recommended to Management Council. The proposal aligns with the feedback and provides a holistic approach to addressing these concerns and improving student-athlete health and safety. Preseason adjustments would include the acclimatization period being extended from 5 to 6 days and reducing the number of allowable full equipment days from 17 to 8. Additionally, there would be a limit to 75 minutes per student athlete of contact during any practice, and no more than 2 consecutive practices could include live tackling to the ground. In the regular season, there would be no more than 2 practices per week of full equipment, 3 practices during a bye week. The spring period would allow helmets on all 16 days, and shoulder pads and helmets would be allowed on 4 of those days. Football players could not engage in live tackling to the ground. This change allows for a more focused approach to teaching appropriate blocking and tackling techniques without the demand of preparing for the next contest. Next up is establishing an emergency legislative process. This proposal permits the Division III President's Council with 3/4 majority president to adopt emergency legislation when the division must respond to or comply with a court alternative dispute resolution, or ADR, or in government order, or when the council deems it appropriate to limit or avoid NCAA liability when the use of the regular legislative cycle is likely to cause undue hardship to the association or the Division III membership because of the delay in its effective date. All emergency legislation adopted by the President's Council must be ratified by the Division III membership at the next regularly scheduled NCAA convention. Next up, expand opportunities recruiting virtually. So virtual athletics recruitment presentations that involve multiple prospective student athletes. The presentations are subject to the following conditions. The virtual recruiting activity may occur at any time of the year, may involve prospective student athletes of any age or grade level, and does not have to be initiated by the institution. Student athletes may only participate in virtual recruiting events that occur during the regular academic year when they are enrolled full-time or eligible to compete. Further, the student athlete's involvement must be voluntary and they may not miss class. Institutional athletics and coaching staff members, other members of the campus community, alumni, and other permissible recruiters may participate in the presentation. And finally, institutions may publicize the logistical details concerning the virtual recruiting event, but is prohibited from promoting or publicizing the participation of an individual or a group of prospective student athletes. Next up is to eliminate the option for a student athlete to sign a written release or waiver declining the sickle cell solubility test. This is an elimination of the option for a student athlete to sign a written release or waiver declining the sickle cell solubility test. Considerations related to the administration of sickle cell solubility tests, student athlete privacy, and institutional management of the care of trait-positive student athletes have evolved since the adoption of the original legislation, which permits a student athlete to sign a written release or waiver to opt out of test participation. The original legislation was intended to provide institutions with the flexibility to evaluate individual program risks and practices and determine test participation requirements at the campus level. CSMAS noted that since there is now an opportunity for institutions to efficiently and effectively manage the administrative and policy burdens historically tied to testing, the benefits related to the appropriate monitoring of sickle cell trait-positive student athletes support the idea of consistent mandatory testing across institutions. And finally, stunt is will possibly be recognized as an emerging sport for women. At the request of the Committee on Women's Athletics, the Council approved sponsorship of 2022 SAAC convention legislation to add stunt as an emerging sport for women. The Council noted the continued growth in high school stunt sponsorship and participation, steady increase in the number of member institutions sponsoring stunt, and support from the sport's national governing body as compelling rationale to include stunt as emerging sport for women.
At the July meeting, the Division III Management Council did approve a non-controversial proposal that came from the Interpretation Legislation Committee, and this proposal calls to permit the new slate of Management Council members to be confirmed by electronic vote. This is a non-controversial proposal. It was approved, and therefore it has an immediate effective date. So what does this mean? What this means is that at the 2022 convention coming up this January, instead of our normal paddle vote to approve the slate of nominees for Management Council, we will not be doing the paddle vote. This voting will take place ahead of the convention in electronic format. The nomination process remains the same, but it will be done via electronic vote, and that will occur before we convene the 2022 January annual convention. Other business from our July Management Council meeting, the council did review the baseball and softball resolution. This was an update coming from the 2020 NCAA convention, where the membership directed the council to review potential changes to the championship date formula for these two sports. This is to mitigate concerns regarding poor playing conditions due to inclement weather, missed class time due to rescheduled contests, and overlap with final exams or graduation ceremonies. And then, of course, equity concerns between spring sports and fall sports, the student athletes in these sports across seasons. So we had these initial recommendations. If you recall, at the 2020 convention, The delegates adopted this resolution. The council revisited this at their July council meeting and will continue to work on this moving forward. The next step here is that our championships committee will provide an update during its next meeting in April, the council's next meeting. So expect more on this as we roll on in past the convention in January. The strategic positioning platform. The platform has been revised. This was the work of a subcommittee of the Strategic Planning and Finance Committee. And the goal here was to ensure that the platform aligned with the new NCAA strategic priorities, as well as align with the reality of Division III in 2021. And there's certain language that was revised, and the document got a new look and feel. So this new document will be released in August to the membership. It is hoped that the membership will re-engage with the platform and use it both internally, for example, in faculty or trustee meetings, as well as externally through its admissions office and through recruiting. The Board of Governors recently announced a comprehensive review of all championships in the association to identify any gaps that need to be addressed, both qualitative and quantitatively, to achieve gender equity. To assist the NCAA in this effort, the Board of Governors has retained the law firm of Kaplan, Hecker, and Fink, which has significant experience in Title IX and gender equity issues. Their job was to evaluate practices and policies and provide recommendations. The report will be made public. Coming out of this, each division's presidential body, so in our case, the Division III President's Council, will determine how the recommendations flow through the Division III governance structure and the final outcomes. We fully anticipate that the Championships Committee, the Student Athlete Advisory Committee, Interpretations and Legislation, and Management Council will review and discuss the recommendations, as well as collaborate with the Division III commissioners and the Division III AD's executive leadership, the NADIA executive leadership. In April of 2020, the NCAA Board of Governors expanded the association-wide policy on campus sexual violence to include individual accountability measures. This action is an opportunity for member schools to evaluate their prevention measures based on their campus policies and state and federal laws. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Education released new Title IX regulations that became effective in August 2020. These new regulations raised several questions for the membership regarding how the association's expanded policy interests with the new requirements intersects with the new requirements of the DOE regulations. Now, to serve the membership in fulfilling this annual policy requirement amidst COVID's challenges, and given the new DOE regulations, the Board of Governors directed the development of a membership task force to provide resources to assist members in developing implementation measures on campus. The task force includes members from all three divisions and shall work to develop operational guidelines, best practices, and supporting documentation that campuses can use to implement the expanded policy. The task force submitted its recommendations to the Board of Governors and released a timeline and checklist resource to the membership this summer. Member schools will be able to use the resource to better prepare for the 2022-23 attestation requirements. Please keep in mind, institutions are still required to attest in May 2022. That's the deadline is May 15, 2022. And that's prior to the expanded policy taking effect with the 2023 attestation. Also, as a reminder, this year's Division III education session at the NCAA convention was on campus sexual violence policy, and it is still available on ncaa.org and shares much more information about the policy and education best practices. Also, anticipate an association-wide webinar this fall detailing the additional requirements. Several governance committees, including the Committee for Women's Athletics, MOIC, as well as competitive safeguards. They are reviewing the policy adopted by the NCAA Board of Governors back in 2011. In October, the Sports Science Institute and the Office of Inclusion held a Gender Identity and Student Athlete Participation Summit. The purpose of the review is to determine what, if any, changes to the policy are needed to ensure the policy continues to, 1, provide fair, inclusive, and dignified participation opportunities for all student athletes, 2, to ensure competitive equity for all student athletes, and 3, be supported by evidence and consensus-based research. The committees and summit engaged in a discussion regarding potential updates to the policy and implications to student athletes and member institutions and conferences. Committee members at the summit also discussed social, legal, and scientific developments since adopting the current policy and noted the need for the policy to maintain a balance between inclusion and equity. SSI is conducting additional research and data collection and will develop foundational educational statements. Anticipate the release of these statements this fall. Now, staff is tracking very closely evolving state legislation concerning transgender athletes that may impact future policy considerations. Currently, 8 states have signed bills banning transgender student athlete participation, and almost 40 more have introduced legislation. In April, the Board of Governors released a statement regarding the recent state activity. The statement noted the BOG firmly and unequivocally supports the opportunity for transgender student athletes to compete in college sports. The commitment is grounded in our values of inclusion and fair competition. And when determining where championships are held, NCAA policy directs that only locations where hosts can commit to providing an environment that is safe, healthy, and free of discrimination should be selected. The BOG will engage in another discussion during its August meeting to determine how the NCAA can maintain an inclusive environment in 21-22. We will continue to closely monitor these situations to determine whether NCAA championships can be conducted in ways that are welcoming and respectful of all participants. And finally, name, image, and likeness, NIL. A little bit of context is important here as I roll us up to what's going on today. At the 2021 NCAA convention, the councils reaffirmed their commitment to providing name, image, and likeness opportunities, NIL opportunities, to Division III student athletes at the first practicable opportunity. However, of input from the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division regarding NIL legislation proposed in all 3 divisions, the President's Council withdrew the proposal. Throughout the development of the proposal, the Division III membership expressed strong support and has been committed to modernizing legislation to provide NIL opportunities to Division III student athletes at the first practicable opportunity, which ended up being in June, since many states were enacting NIL laws effective July 1. Now, a number of significant factors converged to cause the Board of Governors to ask the divisions not to pass the NIL legislative proposals. A number of states had passed their own NIL laws, and those laws are not uniform across states. Congress has not weighed in on how NIL should be regulated at the national level, and the Supreme Court issued its opinion in the Alston NCAA matter. All of these factors combined created concern about the risk to the association if we moved forward with an NIL legislative proposal. As a result, each division opted to pass the interim NIL policy that will remain in effect until there is a federal law or a time the NCAA proposes new legislation. So again, we are in an interim NIL policy space. If the NIL activity is not subject to state law or prohibited by the interim NCAA policy, student athletes should work with professional service providers and their institution for compliance with state law or institutional policy regulation. The educational resources were developed to assist student athletes and institutions and conferences. And please keep in mind that enforcement of NIL rules primarily is at the local level. So in short, what does this mean? If your state that your institution resides in has an NIL law on the books, that is the law that you at your institution will follow. If your state where your institution resides does not have an NIL law, then it'll be incumbent upon the institution to develop, if it so chooses, its own policies in this space of NIL. That's where we stand today. Stay tuned. There will be much more coming on this one.
We just want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned to your emails as we will keep all communications flowing to you on all these great topics. So thank you for tuning in today, and have a great rest of your week, Division 3. Thanks.